Welcome to Real Jam Radio. I'm Danny Leroux, your host, and so happy to have you with us for this episode. This is the long-awaited, and I'm sorry about that, second part of the over-under update analysis with Arturo Galletti. We go through the Western Conference, and I have to note that since we recorded this a little bit over a week ago, some of it is a little bit outdated. For the later part of the episode, because I was editing it over the course of this week, I tried to clean out some of it. We discussed LaMarcus Aldridge being out, Kawhi being out. Of course, both those things have long since resolved, but if anything feels really out of place, that is exactly the reason why, and apologies for that, but, that's the way that happens sometimes. And this week's episode is brought to you by mybookie.ag, a great way for those of you who are choosing to gamble on various things to do so. You go to mybookie.ag and you enter the promo code REALGM, and they will give you a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Also, Harry's, high-quality razors at a reasonable price. You can get the most popular trial set for free by going to harrys.com/realgm, and all you have to pay is a small price for shipping. And then our old friends at SeatGeek. You download the free SeatGeek app. It's a great way to buy and sell tickets, and you use the promo code REALGM, and you get $20 back as a rebate on your first purchase. The episode itself runs about an hour and a half, goes through all the teams. There are also timestamps, which are accurate because I had to do them actually after the fact, so you can use those if you want to hear something about a specific team. But of course, we bounce around a lot and talk about teams in the context of other ones, because especially with the playoffs looking closer, that's a very important thing to do. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Loved recording it, loved talking with Arturo, and here it is. The West is interesting too. Again, we're gonna go bottom to top. So we're going to start with the team that had the lowest projected amount of wins, the Los Angeles Lakers. The numbers were 24.5 or 26.5. We both, on the logic of Byron Scott is not going to be their coach anymore, we both said over, and you said play it, I said fade it, and it looks like they're going to go over, though they've been falling a little bit hard. I still think they're going to go over without that much of an issue.
This is a well-coached team. I think partly with the organization changes just did, we don't know exactly what their plan, so they might just give up some games here, but I think they should be over. I like Luke Walton, so I think that he's demonstrably better coach than they were last year. I think that there are some things because they're just trying to develop talent. I think that the thing is they don't actually have that guy in the room. I don't think they have the next Laker guy in the building. Do you?
No, I don't think they do. I think they might get that guy in this draft, but I don't think they have him right now.
Yeah, I think Ingram might be a good piece, but all their young guys have not been that great this season. Right, I think probably Russell might be the best guy in the building right now. Maybe Ingram, but it's really hard to tell because Ingram's so young, right? So it's we don't know who they are yet. And then again,
right. And also their talent doesn't fit together yet, which is a problem. I think they have a lot of players that are going to be better as the third, fourth, or fifth best guy on a good team, and they're going to need that first or second. I'm not sure they're going to get that this year necessarily. There's certainly a chance if they keep their pick. But they're going to have to, and that's the other reason why I hated the Mozgov and Dang contract so much, was because it makes it that much harder to get the players that move above them.
Do you think that the Lakers front office got better with the moves they make, or they got worse?
They got better just because their front office wasn't good before. So, I don't think Rob Pelinka is going to make the Mozgov contract, so that makes them better.
I didn't have a great opinion of the front office before. Some changes better, and I think, Magic has had some success with, in other sports. So, yeah, I do think that it's better. I do think that they don't have the guy there, and, when do you think the next time, if you had to put a date on it, when do you think the next time the Lakers are going to make the playoffs is going to be?
2020, 2021. I think that's about right. So another 3 seasons, get a chance to kind of turn this over a little bit. Walton gets a chance. I think they'll be close in 2 more years, and maybe they'll make it that year. So that would be 18-19. Oh, so maybe 19-20. I think I counted one too many years. 19-20, I think they'll probably do it.
I think because I like Walton, I might give him a year earlier, right? I'm talking about the 8th seed, so I'm talking 18-19. But yeah, I'm in the same place. I don't think that this team is in a great place right now, roster-wise. Right, so would you take their roster or Philadelphia's roster?
Philly, including their remaining assets, like drafts picks and whatnot.
Well, no,
Philly and
guys on the team.
I'd take Philly even without the draft pick difference because I think Embiid and Simmons are each better than anybody on the Lakers right now.
Is Sark better than anybody on the Lakers right now?
Yeah, probably, but he's also older, so I could very well see it that by the time we're talking, they're going to be a playoff team that Ingram is better than Dario.
So I think we've talked enough about the Lakers. I think they're moving in the right direction, but they got a long road to go.
I think that's fair. So we'll move on to the Suns. The Suns, the numbers were 27.5, 29.5. We split. You took the under. I took the over. It looks like we, again, might both be right. It's going to be kind of right on the margin.
Yeah, I think a lot of these, where we both split and said fade, was the line's about right, and it was about right. I mean, is there anybody you like on this particular Suns team?
No one I love. Lots of guys I like. TJ Warren, Tyler Ulis, Dragon Bender if they can put him in the right role. Those type of guys. But and I like Eric Bledsoe, but just not on their team because he's a little bit too old and he doesn't make sense with their surrounding talent. So I would try to move Bledsoe. I've been saying that for a year now. But yeah, I like a lot of their young guys. It's another team, but so I talked about for the Lakers, their guys like Russell and Ingram are more like the third or fourth best guy on a good team. A lot of the guys that I like on the Suns are more in the 4th through 7th range on a good team, and so they're going to need more on top of it. But they have more flexibility.
Bledsoe's a guy who could be a difference maker on a playoff team.
Absolutely.
So by my numbers, he was part of the backcourt, the best defensive backcourt against wings. It was him with Chris Paul that I have records for since '86. They just killed everybody, every guard who played against them. So Bledsoe is a really good piece defensively and offensively. So, but yeah, he doesn't make any sense on Phoenix, right? Because that team isn't anywhere close to contention right now. Right? They're so he's an asset. Do you see any possible homes for him?
Orlando, it's a possibility. I think you would make them better.
That makes sense. If there's a trade between Phoenix and Orlando, how does somebody win that trade? Aren't both teams supposed to lose that trade?
I think the way that Phoenix would win that trade is if Orlando overpays, or if basically because Bledsoe would make Orlando better, but I'm not sure he would make them better enough to make the playoffs. So I think you could make an argument that is how they would win that trade. Let's say the Magic didn't trade this year's first. Let's say they traded next year's first with some sort of very light protection on it, and maybe instead of that pick being 17, it ends up being 11 or 12. Then you could say that Phoenix would win that trade.
Yeah, there's a guy that should have been Minnesota should have offered Rubio for, or the Knicks should have offered Rose for.
I think it would have been wise though for the Suns to turn those trades down. He's better than that, and those teams don't really have the right assets for him.
Yeah, Bledsoe would be a great fit on that. He actually would be a great fit on the Timberwolves. And I love
Absolutely.
Rubio, but he would be a great fit because he's the kind of guy that Tibbs would love him because he's really good defensively and he does stuff, and he would be a good fit on that team. It's like Bledsoe's having he's for some reason they have a Maserati out back, and it just doesn't make sense for that team.
Yeah,
it's a mom on a budget with a Maserati out back. It's what are you doing?
We can move on to a team we just brought up a little bit in passing, the Minnesota Timberwolves, because they only won 29 games last year. They're next on the list. Their projection was, of course, higher than some of the other teams, 40.5, 41.5. We both wanted to fade the over just because we believed in the talent on this team. I think we were right in our evaluation. It was just that they had that rough start to the year, and so they're going to go under.
Well, they're having one of those weird seasons where their point margin doesn't match their actual record. So, and what I mean by that, kids, is they've got the point margin of a 500 team. I believe it's exactly almost at 0, and they're basically 11 games below 500. They actually still have a chance to make the playoffs, I think. But it's a team that we both like them. I think that I've seen a lot of growth where I needed to see it. Karl Anthony Towns has been great. The elephant in the room, and for me, and it will continue to be, is Wiggins. I don't think Wiggins is a guy who's really not as good as people think he is, and he's the Rudy Gay, and remember Rudy Gay on the Grizzlies, where I think he's a guy who kind of long term might actually hurt them more than he helps. And I get that he's talented, I get that he does things that look athletically good, but he just there's missing spots in his games that kind of hurt them, particularly if they're going to use him that much, right? So he may be something where they need to think about whether they want to continue to build around him. Right? And this is season 3 or season 4 for him at this point?
This is season 3. He'll be extension eligible this year, and who knows, they might get something done. But okay, so my opinion on Wiggins has improved over the course of this year. I think he's been better offensively and better defensively than he was last year, which was not a high bar. I thought he was very overrated last year. But this ties in with what you're saying. I don't think that the way that he has improved has made him an ideal fit for the Wolves, and that is because I love Karl Anthony Towns so much that I don't think they need a high usage wing. I think they can work it in a very different way.
Let me put it this way. Straight up. Would you rather have Otto Porter or Andrew Wiggins?
Wiggins because of his ceiling. I mean, right now I would rather have Otto Porter on this team, but Wiggins could be a whole lot better in a year or two than he is right now.
Would you rather? Who would you rather pay what the free agent market's going to give?
Wiggins for exactly that. Well, Otto Porter is going to get maxed, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, my problem is, like, I don't see Wiggins as a max player. And I think that, like, and the Rudy Gay comparison comes back to me because Rudy Gay got maxed for that Memphis team, and he was in, basically, and they got better when they traded him. And it wasn't that Rudy Gay was a bad player. And actually, even, like, he went to Toronto and, like, he had that crazy high usage where he wasn't good. But, like, he's actually been good once he's been the secondary guy or tertiary guy on the team and other stuff because he had the physical skills and he can actually do that. And I think with Wiggins, it's a little stranger because Wiggins doesn't do the other things. I kind of feel like you have to consider moving him when his value is still high, right? I don't know that he's the guy.
I agree with you and would consider it, but I also think it's not going to happen. So, I think that it's kind of a weird thing to do. It's just, but I agree with you. I mean, I think that it's something they should consider. They should definitely field offers. I think he's also exactly the type of player that certain teams would overvalue and then give you a stupid offer, which is even better if you're Minnesota, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that basically they always need to have the phone open for him. I get it. I mean, you can always argue, hey, I might get it, but, like, I've got data going back on going to college, and this is the guy who he's been, right? Given the game that we have now, there are more efficient options for you as a team, and again, his value. The point being, his value is greater than his actual market value is greater than his actual value to the team, right? And here's the other thing: is, like, I have this feeling because he's not a great defender, right? I have a feeling that the amount of time that Tibbs is going to be able to put up with him is you're on the clock with him, right? So he just feels like a guy that eventually Tibbs is going to get tired of, because he's not. If he gets the defense, that's great, but he hasn't gotten it. And if he doesn't get it, then you know how Tibbs is. Tibbs will burn it out. Like, eventually it'll become like a divorce as opposed to like, maybe we can kind of trade it for something. You know what I mean?
I do. I do understand what you mean. It's just a tough situation from a realist sense. I agree with you from a pragmatist sense, but that's just kind of the way it is. But I think we've talked enough about the Wolves at this point, unless you want to talk a little bit about Towns, but I don't think we need to. And move on to another team with talented big men, the New Orleans Pelicans. Pelicans, this is another one that's in line. This is the team that another one where I just was higher on them. So I picked the over. It was 35.5 or 37.5. I went over fade, you went under play, and you got it right.
Yeah, and I had Alvin Drente as the first coach fired. We haven't had any coach fired this year, have we?
I don't think we're going to have any in the regular season. I think we will have turnover, but I don't think it'll be during the season.
But if you had to get somebody getting fired, it might be Gentry.
Yeah, he's certainly in that very limited conversation. I memean, they're a team that has underperformed relative to expectations, and that's the easiest way for a coach to get fired.
We both think that the Boogie trade was a terrible, terrible trade for Sacramento.
Oh, of course, because the assets they got back weren't good.
Yeah, it's like it's.
Well, unless New Orleans loses enough that this pick gets better than we thought it was going to be.
Well, no,
but they won tonight.
Isn't it supposed to be like top 3 protected?
It's top 3 protected, yeah. So, but like it could end up being the 4th or 5th pick. I don't expect that to happen, but it's possible.
Yeah, I think the issue. Okay, so Boogie's kind of burning his walk. This is in essence his last shot. Now, I'm not as high on Boogie historically as everybody else is. I think he's always been overrated. I think partly because he gets in his own way and whatnot. I thought part of that was organization. I think it was going to be similar to other guys that have left the Kings. I think it's going to get better. But that said, this hasn't looked great. Now, granted, I think part of the problem is like a not great coach wasn't necessarily going to figure out how to work this because this is kind of a little bit of a different situation. But I do think that Boogie's on the clock here. We saw what AD did tonight. We know AD is good, right? And I think Boogie has to kind of come up. Now, I think here's the thing. I think it should work. I don't know that this is the best possible situation where Boogie could have wound up.
odd. I think that basically New Orleans just kind of has to do two different things at once. One is they need to be open, and this is going to sound crazy to some people, to trading Cousins again, to just basically saying if it doesn't work, you do that. But at the same point, I do believe, especially considering they gave up so little to get him, because I don't think that much of Buddy Hield, and I think that their first round pick is good, but it's not amazing. What that means is, I also think that there are coaches that exist. I don't specifically know who it is. There was a piece that I saw that suggested Becky Hammon. Very interesting possibility for this. Somebody who's creative enough to make this work. So I think you kind of have to do both those things at the same time. You have to find a coach that is talented and capable enough of doing that while also considering shopping him. And that's a really challenging double to do, especially for a front office that hasn't exactly been the most proactive, but it's worth considering.
Yeah, of course Becky could do it. I mean, like, Pop could do it. Like, hell, just watch Spurs games this season. You can watch Spurs games for the last 4 seasons to figure out how to work 2 bigs together. There's tape all across the board.
Well, and Davis can shoot. Like, it's not even you don't even have the issue of 2 big men who can't shoot together.
I mean, the problem is also like that the roster on this team is really soft. Like, they've got those 2 guys that are really top heavy. But here's the thing: I think New Orleans is in a really good situation. You make that trade a million times out of a million. Right? They gave up nothing to get Boogie. And as you're saying, in the worst possible scenario, you just trade him. Somebody will buy on Boogie, right? You will be able to move him for something. So you will never, like, worst case, you can move into the Lakers for whatever, for a bunch of guys, like in a couple of years or something, right? So, I mean, like, even given how you bought him for like 10 cents on the bar, basically. And again, I think that it can work. It just, as you say, it takes somebody like Hammond, somebody who actually kind of gets how to run the screens. Now, ideally, you'd like to get a couple more shooters around it, but I think that New Orleans is in a much better position. I don't think that they're going to do anything this year, right? Because just from seeing it, we were like, the big question was like, well, can Alvin Gentry figure it out? I think the answer to me is it's a big resounding no. They're not going to fire him probably, but like I don't think Alvin Gentry is going to be coaching this team next year. I think it's going to be an interesting team next year with a different coach, right? They're not making the playoffs this year.
Agreed. They're not making the playoffs this year. They're basically out of it. And with Boogie at this point, it's hard to figure out the real perfect fit next to him because you need somebody who's a reliable defensive piece, somebody who can be a rim protector. But you would also, in order to maximize Cousins, you want somebody who can also shoot. And so you're looking for basically a unicorn. And you're also looking for like a unicorn that is probably better served with somebody else. You know, like that's the other part of this equation is like, you know, the teams that have like prime Serge Ibaka would be a wonderful fit next to DeMarcus Cousins. But generally speaking, teams like that actually have better talent than DeMarcus Cousins.
You need Anthony Davis to play more like LeBron, basically, what you mean. And what I mean by that is you need him to play more on the wing and drive the ball and run ISO and run like a 4-3 kind of deal. And if
but Davis is also better to me and as a kind of a different kind of defensive big man. Like I think he can. It's a little bit of a different role, but I think they could make it work.
You remember when LeBron was protecting the rim for Miami?
Yeah, he also did some of that for Cleveland last year.
Right. So that's kind of what I'm saying. Where like Davis, I think has the skill set to kind of which we compare, but he has a crazy skill set. I mean, in essence, you just need him to play out and shoot and create some space. But I mean, again, it's and I said that when they made the trade. Go look at Spurs film. Go see what they do. Go see what they do with Kawhi. Right? What they do with Kawhi was he's posting up and he's driving. That's kind of what you want a little bit out of Anthony Davis. And then have the guy, they've used Dedmon, they've used Powell, the guy, LaMarcus, the guy who's playing that big man role. Boogie can do that. Right? And as I said, there's film. There's teams that do this kind of stuff. And you can find it. I don't think Gentry's the guy, but like it just doesn't seem to have worked so far. And I think that they're going to probably have a different coach, but I think they did something right. And I think that New Orleans clearly won that trade. And as you said, worst case, they can make a trade. They're not making the playoffs this year, though. But no. I think it's a really interesting kind of move that they make. And I'm going to be really interested to see the roster they put together. I think part of it is also that, I mean, how do you feel about Drew Holiday here? Is he the right guy?
I would like somebody who's a little bit more comfortable running pick and roll because that can be the foundation of it. Also, you probably like George Hill would actually be a really nice fit with that if they could theoretically. They're not going to be able to if they could theoretically make that swap. But I don't know what Drew Holiday wants because I think he can see the writing on the wall for exactly what being the point guard of that team is. And I could totally see him saying, I would rather be the point guard somewhere else over that, because so maybe Chicago would be an interesting option for him. The Knicks with Porzingis would be a very interesting option for him.
You know who'd be really good? Who might be really good with Boogie and AD as a point guard? Rubio.
He can't shoot though. Teams would just go under everything.
I don't want him to shoot. I've got 2 usage monsters.
Yeah, but teams are just going to sink. I think teams are going to sink in. I would actually rather see Bledsoe than Rubio.
I thought of Bledsoe too, but I was actually Bledsoe. We keep throwing him in. Bledsoe's really interesting, but I mean, I think Rubio. This might be the best situation because he doesn't need to shoot, right? So fine, you can slough off him. He'll still get open looks at different ranges, and you've got 2 monsters to pass to, right? So it might be really interesting. But again, it's going to take somebody who knows. So you want a guy who's going to pass the ball, right? You want to pass a guy who's going to pass the ball to these 2 guys, right? And I think that's kind of where, I think the roster isn't quite constructed. I do think having those 2 guys is a plus. But Boogie is on. You agree with me that Boogie's on the clock, though?
Oh, absolutely, of course.
Right. This is. You're not in Sacramento, and and here's the thing. I thought if he actually does a good job, New Orleans is a really good place to be. This is a great city, and it's it should be like when Zebo went to Memphis, right? It's just, we don't know if this is going to work on the court yet. I think it can, but the right person needs to be running. And you mentioned Becky, and I think Becky would be a really good fit. She deserves the job. I think she's really good.
Yeah, I think so too. Before Arturo and I get to the Denver Nuggets, I want to take a little bit of time to tell you about mybookie.ag. Now, it's a perfect time for them to come on as a sponsor because there's a certain college basketball event that is getting a lot of attention, and I'm sure a fair amount of our listeners, those who pay more attention to college hoops than I have been, sadly, this year, might want to wager on. And mybookie.ag is a great way to do that and not worry about some of the issues that can plague betting sites, like especially payouts and just structural things. And so you can make your bets, you can win your money, and get it without any sort of hassles or runaround. And how you do it is you go to mybookie.ag, mybookie.ag, and then there's a space to enter a promo code. You enter the promo code REALGM, REALGM, just like the site I write for, and Real Jam Radio is the name of this podcast, and you get a 50% bonus on your first deposit. So that means if you put in $100, they'll give you an extra $50 to play with, and you can play, win, and get paid with your money and that extra 50% bonus. So you can also call 844-900-BETS, 844-900-BETS. And again, the promo code, if you want to go to mybookie.ag, is REALGM. 50% bonus on your first thing. It's a great time to do it now with everything that's going on in college hoops and everything else in sports. It's actually a really wonderful time of year for that. So check it out. So we'll move on to the Denver Nuggets, who we both liked. The over on them was 33.5 or 36.5. We both liked the over. I said to play it, you said not, and they're going over. They're
going over. I thought they were going to do some trades and blow some stuff up.
Yeah, they were. We listed them as a tank candidate, and that certainly could have been the case. And they did well enough that they stayed above the line.
Well, I think the couple things that they did that were really interesting was they kept Fareed. They knew when to cut bait on Moutier, right? Who really was killing them. He was terrible early in the season. And they made a decent trade for. They decided. They couldn't have Jokic and Nurkic. They're both good, but they said, "This is full in. This is Jokic's team," and really, it's worked out. Malone's a great coach. When I say that, because he's a guy historically who experiments a lot with his lineups, and once something doesn't work, he just goes away from it. And I think that's been really interesting. I really like the roster this team has, and I really think that they've done some good things. Now again, there's some moves to be made, but this is a good, decent team. We think they're making the playoffs, right?
Yeah, I think so. There are other teams that have a chance, but the fact that they have basically a 2-game lead on everybody else is a big help.
Yeah, I think. Again, what's interesting is they traded with Portland, and we'll talk about it. But I think Portland, they really made Portland better, right? Portland's a better team now with Nurkic, and I think Dallas is really interesting with Noel. So I think all those 3 teams are actually really good. I like those 3 teams, Denver, Portland, and Dallas, to kind of be. They have some interesting places to go, and I think they're going to be good. I think some of the older teams are slipping back. I think we're starting to see a little bit on Memphis. I think Denver is really well placed to kind of move up. Now, again, I think they need a little more talent, but having a guy like Jokic is a huge luxury. And I was actually pointing this out. So, who would you rather have, Jokic or Porzingis?
Wow, it's an interesting question because they kind of have similar strengths and weaknesses. It's just that Jokic is pushing more one direction and less the other. I think I'd rather have I think I'd rather have Porzingis just because I think there's a possibility that he could be both, that he could be a very good offensive player and still be league average or better defensively. And with Jokic, I think that trade-off is a lot harder to take with a center, but I love both of them.
Yeah, I think that Jokic has been great. I think I agree with you. I mean, we've seen Porzingis play good defense. It's just I think the situation is really different. I think Denver has done everything. I think we mentioned before. Denver has done everything to make sure that he's well served. So it's been really good. So again, I mean, I love where they are, and I would really enjoy seeing them in the playoffs. I don't know that we're going to get that, but they'd be an interesting first round series for San Antonio or Golden State. We'll get to that, but I kind of feel like San Antonio maybe. Okay, we can talk about that a little later.
Yeah, let's talk about it a little bit later. A couple teams to get through between now and then. One of them is the Sacramento Kings. The Kings' number was set at 31.5 or 33.5. We both thought that was low and said to go over, and it's going to be a very close call. Your prediction has it at 32.2. I actually think they're going to go under 31.5. I think they're going to win 31 or less.
Yeah, 2-8. I think that it's going to be really close. I think they're probably going to be under. So once everything kind of fixes out, do that. Do we like any of the players on Sacramento?
I don't know that I like any of them as starters, but there are a series of guys that I think could be useful, kind of rotation players. I like Scal as a rotation player. I like Costa Koufos as a backup. I like Buddy Hield as a backup. Malachi could be a backup. A lot of those type of situations. And they've been paying Darren Collison backup money to start, and he's been okay. But the problem is just the way that their books are is weird. The way their assets are is weird. Just a lot, and I don't trust their front office.
It's would you rather have their assets and players or Brooklyn's assets and players? Go ahead.
Theirs because they have picks this year and next year, and the unprotected one in 2019 is unfortunate.
Wait, didn't they trade that to Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They don't have their 2019. So after this season, each one of them is out one unprotected future pick. For Brooklyn, it's 2018. For the Kings, it's 2019. So you can call that a wash. But I think the Kings have a couple of rotation guys on their team. And also, their salary, they have a lot of kind of weird money on their books, but it's not that much just terrible money on their books.
If you had to pick who's going to win more games in the next 5 years, either the Kings or the Nets, who would you pick?
Oh, the Nets, without hesitation, because they're a better run team.
The Kings are kind of, they're on record right now to making two of the worst 10 trades in the last 20 years, in the last 24 months, right? That Philly trade is still kind of, and I remember laughing at the time, but that trade has gotten worse over time. And I think this Boogie trade was just wow, we've never had an all-star starter traded for less that I can remember. Basically, at the All-Star game, I've never seen a guy who started the All-Star game be traded during the All-Star game for less than I can.
He didn't start the All-Star game, but he was at the All-Star game.
He was at the All-Star game. But
it's a distinction without that much of a difference. But yeah, I agree with you. And he's young. It's not like he was traded he's a 35-year-old All-Star who got traded for it. No, he's in his 20s. This is a guy who maybe he's not going to get better than he is now, but he can certainly stay at this level and improve with coaching.
Yeah, I think we can. I think we're okay to move on from the Kings.
Yes, move on to a team that we are more positive about, the Utah Jazz. The Jazz was at 44.5 or 47.5, and we both said hammer the over. We both loved it, liked Quinn Snyder for potential coach of the year. They're going to blow through the over. I don't think Snyder is going to win coach of the year, but I still really like this team, and what's incredible about it is that I think we both assumed, we're kind of thinking they would have reasonable injury luck, and they've had terrible injury luck, and they're still going to break through their number.
Well, I mean, I think, they've had better injury luck than last year because, I know what you mean, but, they lost Gobert and Favors last year, and that was just, bad. Now, they've had Rudy for most of the year, and I know they had Favors was out, but, defensively, that makes a huge difference. Hayward's been healthier than he was last year. Hill has been hurt, but I think, the top six for this team is really outstanding. So Hayward, Gobert, Hill, Inglis, Favors, and Joe Johnson as actually. And Joe in a six-man role is great. Do we think the Jazz can make the finals?
I think they have an outside shot of it. I'd say like 10% or less, but their ceiling is ludicrously high.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is because they play in Utah, so that's but their top six is really good, and in a playoff series, they can shut you down, right?
But so they're not going to get any calls.
No, they're not going to get any calls.
First-time playoff team.
Well, I mean, keep in mind that we've seen that the Warriors get less calls than they should. So I mean, let's say, and I was saying this, the Warriors basically kind of, well, actually, it would probably be the Spurs. So I actually, we were talking about this earlier. I think the Warriors kind of whoever ends up with the 1 seed is going to see the Jazz. So say it's the Warriors. It's an interesting series because the Jazz have size, and size is something that gives the Warriors kind of fits, and they've got Rudy in the middle. And it would be a really interesting series with George Hill and so. I mean, I think I agree with it. They wouldn't get any calls, but I think that they would have a puncher's chance. And I think the West is evil, but I think they have I think they definitely win I think they definitely beat the Clippers in the series. No.
I really like the Clippers' top 5. Their starting lineup is quite good, and I think that the Jazz are the favorites in that series, but I don't think it's definite at all.
I think the Clippers are done. I think the Clippers, as much as I think this is kind of the expiration. I think next season they're losing the first round. I think Blake is gone. I think Doc is gone. I think that's kind of my feel for that. It just feels like it's just gone on.
See, that's interesting because for me, I think that if either of their stars leaves, I think it's CP, not Blake, because I think Chris Paul cares more about the writing being on the wall because this is his last shot. Blake Griffin is going to have this contract and a little more. Oh, I think if one leaves, both leave, because I think they're both smart enough to know that if one leaves, they're just dead in the water.
It might be all three. If you reset it,
I'm not counting Doc in that.
Let's fantasy book this, right? Wrestling term. So let's say they lose the first round, Doc is gone. Who are they bringing? Let's say Maury's out there. So if that's the case, then if you're doing that, then yeah, it might just be everybody gone for assets, right? Let's do the process.
But the problem with that is that this is the reason why I advocated and got a lot of heat for it for the Clippers to trade Chris Paul last year, was because if they lose those guys, they're not getting assets. They're just losing them. If Blake and CP leave, they're not getting. I mean, maybe they're getting something marginal if they want to be signed and traded to a team that has, that is in that wiggle room between the cap and the tax. But that's very hard because that team would be hard capped, and they're not going to get much anyway. Though there isn't much of a precedent for that. And both those guys are going to have offers from good teams. So Blake could, if he wanted to, he could jump to the Celtics or whatever else. And CP can basically go wherever the heck he wants as long as that team has enough space to fit him in.
We're talking. Let's get back to the Jazz before we get to we're going to get back to the Clippers as well, Mike, because this is interesting. I have some questions, but we can get back to that. So the Jazz, do we think they can make the finals?
Outside shot. I said I still think it's 10%, something like that.
I like this team, but yeah, if they were in the East, I think they make the finals.
If they were in the East, they would have a much better. You could double or triple those chances of making the finals.
Cleveland might have serious problems against this because this team again, this is a deep team with good rim protection.
Plus Cleveland relies so much on driving, and the Jazz don't need to help as much on drives because they have Rudy Gobert down there. So they can just structure their defense completely differently than a lot of these other teams.
Right, and that's why it would take super. But they're in the wrong conference. I think they have a decent chance to win the first round. I think if it's the Clippers, they do. I think second round becomes a little more complicated because it would be the Spurs of the Warriors, and that's I think it would be interesting, but I don't think they're actually getting it done. So, and we don't think Snyder's going to win it. Who do you think is going to win Coach of the Year? I have a name.
This might be Pop's year. Because the Spurs, if the Spurs end up with the best record in the league, which I now think is more likely than not, if they end up with the best record in the league, then you get that narrative. There aren't really that many teams that blew away expectations and have a coach that is very well liked. There's an outside shot. Scott Brooks gets it. I'm not saying he would deserve it, but I'm saying there's a shot he could get it. There isn't really a Terry Stotts this year, even though Terry Stotts didn't win it last year. But there isn't really that guy.
Yeah, I think it's Pop. I think it's clearly. Has Stevens won it?
No, I believe he has not.
Yeah, but he wouldn't. I don't think he'd win it this year. I think it's Pop.
No, I don't think he'd win over Pop. I mean, their expectations were high.
I think if Pop gets the 1 seed and the one record in the league, he wins, and it becomes a really it comes down to it's Harden and Kawhi to have no idea who wins. Like then in that case, I don't know who the hell wins the MVP because it'll be
I'm not even kind of at that point. I think Russ has a good shot at it, but again, it gets into the idea of voting versus logic and all that kind of stuff. It's complicated.
We'll get into that, but yeah, like it's nobody's won with that few wins. Nobody since Malone. It's been
Russ is the anomaly case of anomaly cases for all reasons. We'll talk about that with OKC. But so let's move on. We talked about the Jazz, Rockets, another team we're both very interested in. It was projected 42. Their number was actually even. You only had it 42.5, and we both said hammer the over. Yeah. We love this team, love D'Antoni, and guess what? Nailed it.
And we loved Harden at 25-1 to win. That was the
which
best.
was a great bet too.
That was the best call. It's like, no, Harden's 25-1 in the Harden system. Yeah, I mean, like I did, and I get a lot of heat for this. I did the top 50 of all time, and I had Harden. Right now I have Harden, Durant, and Westbrook in my top 50 NBA players of all time. They're all on OKC. Given what we've seen, man, like I always said like Harden should have played the point guard. And Russ should have been the shooting guard, and good lord, would have been amazing on that team. It's just the Rockets are really interesting to me because they're the ultimate punch. Like they can beat anybody the way they play. They have like the amount of shooting this team has on the floor is ridiculous. They can put 5 shooters on the floor, right? And they got shooting on the bench. They got shooting everywhere, and they just shoot threes like maniacs. This is like the perfect D'Antoni team. And they actually have like very decent rebounding on this team. So in a series, there isn't a team that they can't beat, right? Because they're that technical boxer that if you screw up, he's going to kill you, right? Because like they're going to play the right way, they're going to shoot those threes, and you're going to have to beat them. So I actually think there's something. I think they're running at 20-1, and I think that's too low. I think they should be something like probably 10-1 or 15-1 to win the title. Because, like, again, in any they're not going to be worse than 40% in any series that they play. Just because, like, if they get hot shooting, they can just beat anybody.
See, here's the thing, though. I see the logic that you're getting at, but I also think that they're so dependent in terms of shot creation on one guy. It's not about the system, it's about James Harden. And like they have all these great shooters, but if James Harden can't do what he's supposed to do, then you do that. And so the problem is like that you could say, oh, well, it's really hard to stop James Harden. That's true. But both the Warriors and the Spurs, and depending on how Utah structures everything else, and Utah is kind of an X factor and all this stuff, but more importantly, the top two teams both have the personnel to stop the Rockets. I think, and they're presumably, like, you have to assume that they're going to have to beat both of those teams.
There's a little bit of a twist here. Like, I think that getting Lou Williams is underrated. The fact that they went out and got, like, so having Lou Williams and having Patrick Beverley, it's like, even if Harden isn't, like, they have guys.
Yeah, but Lou Williams is, you know, he's a better version of Jamal Crawford. Like, he's going to get his, but he's not going to create a successful offense by himself, and you're not going to play him as a starter. So, like, he helps. Like, I think Lou Williams could swing a couple games in a series just because he will dominate those bench units. But if the structural part, if a team can take away a lot of what Harden does, Lou Williams is not going to cover that gap. He's going to cover a smaller gap.
It's so hard because, like, and you've watched this team. There's so much shooting on this team. It just breaks you defensively, because there's everybody on the floor can freaking shoot. Like, they can shoot.
Yeah, but it only breaks you defensively if you can't defend their pick and rolls 2-on-2. If you can defend their pick and rolls 2-on-2, those guys aren't going to do that much, except if they stand like 4 feet out, which Ryan Anderson can, Eric Gordon can. They're only breaking a defense. This is actually, so you might remember this because you and I have had conversations about this before, but like after the fact, about how I was super critical of the way that Miami defended Dallas in the 2011 finals. Mm-hmm. And my logic was, you know, like, all their guys other than Dirk aren't going to beat you one-on-one. So basically just keep a guy on them and just handle Dirk the way that you're going to do it. And Miami put way too much of a focus on him. They let all these other guys get open shots. I think that both the Spurs and the Warriors can hedge that and can make that work. I agree with you, though, that they're another team like the Jazz that would benefit from a top 16 format, because I think there are only a couple teams that give the Rockets trouble. It's just that they happen to be two teams they're going to have to beat to get to the finals.
I think if the Rockets were in the East, they sweep through it. I mean, I don't think there's a team in the East that can actually stop them. Right? That's my feeling. Because, again, it's the way they're constructed, right? If you put them in the East, there isn't anybody who
like, they're a horrendous matchup for the Cavs. Because you could put Patrick Beverley on Kyrie. They don't have a guy to really stop LeBron, but Ariza could slow him down. Like, that series would be, we talked about it a little bit earlier. The Rockets would have a very reasonable chance in that series.
Well, yeah, because they just like the Cavs really don't have they don't have like a decent defender on the wing that can actually throw out there, and like if you don't do that, then you can't play that one-on-one defense with like bad defenders they play against. The Rockets will just take you out.
Well, you also can't switch. Let's say you put LeBron on that pick and roll. Who do you have as the other guy in that pick and roll, and how are you not going to get murdered? You can't.
You basically have to pray in that series. No, I mean, here's the thing. I agree with you. It's the Spurs and the Warriors are the teams that have the talent to actually do this. It's interesting because, even then, and again, it's like this. Here's the thing. I wouldn't favor the Houston in the series against the Spurs or the Warriors, but I wouldn't probably put them below 40%. Because again, it's that like if the way they shoot, it's so much. There's gonna be a game in the series that like the Rockets are gonna show up and you're not gonna beat them, right? You know what I mean? They're gonna show up and they're gonna start hitting threes and it's just walk away, right? And I think that's kind of interesting. They're a really interesting team. And again, I didn't expect them. I expected them to be good. I didn't expect them to be quite this good this quickly, right? And I'm actually I think it's actually kind of silly that like the league, like the other GMs in the league failed in that they let the Rockets get this much shooting on the team. How is it possible that the Rockets were able to just get this much shooting? Right?
Well, no, I understand why they did, because they were able to capitalize on some underutilized assets that had major injury risks. Like if Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson got years and dollars, that would have made a lot of other teams queasy, but they got put in the perfect system, and they've been completely healthy this year. They're getting the best of both worlds. The downside of those contracts was always years 3 and 4, and we're not there yet, but they're wonderful right now.
Yeah, and I think the Lou Williams thing is on there. Like, Jesus, they didn't pay anything for him. And I think that, like, do you agree that, like, Lou Williams gets playing time on basically all the top teams? Like, he might not start, but, yeah, I mean, but, like, the Spurs play him, the Warriors play him, the Cavs would start him.
No, and they play JR and have him play seriously because they don't need another guy with the ball in his hands. They'd play him off the bench, but they'd use him a lot.
The Spurs would basically line up in the corner. Well, actually, the Spurs would use him in PNR and, like, hammer. But, so, yeah, I mean, like, having him get all this team is actually interesting. So I actually think, where would you put the odds on the Rockets winning the title, given what we know about the injuries now?
5 to 10%.
Yeah, because their road's going to be tough.
Their road's brutal, and they're going to be getting these teams. It's not like they're getting the Warriors or the Spurs in the first round. They'd be getting the Warriors in the second round. So that'll be, I think that would be 8 weeks. That would be 8 weeks after Durant injured his MCL. That's probably enough time for him to be close to 100%. And their personnel is just not a good matchup against the Warriors. Like the Warriors, they'll handle them pretty well.
There's a very real chance that there would. I mean, like, if I had to guess where it's going to end up, they're going to end up third, and they're going to get. Do we think?
Well, they're getting the Warriors and Spurs in the next 2 rounds. Like, basically, the way that they
might get the Thunder in the first round. So it might be Thunder, then Warriors, Spurs.
And the Thunder, it'll be interesting with the Thunder's new personnel. We'll talk about them in a little bit. I actually think that the Thunder got better against a lot of teams, but not as much against the Rockets because they don't have, like, Taj is not perfect in that matchup, but it'll be interesting.
So in essence, the Rockets are almost like the final boss. You know what I mean? So in essence, they're the final boss, and if you're not perfect against the final boss, you're not getting past the final boss. So I think that, like, they're leveled down, but, like, they're going to play in such a way that if you're not on game, right, and if you're missing guys or if you're not sharp, they can take you out. And I think it's surprising to me. And we thought they were going to be better than the 42. I thought they were going to be around 45, 46, but I thought they still had some things. There was some injury risk we talked about. So I'm really surprised that they're this good, and it's really interesting where they're going to wind up in the next few years. I mean, I like this roster. What do you feel about this roster?
It's good for right now. I'm not completely sure how it's going to age. I think they have a lot of guys that they're at maybe they're not past their prime, but that you don't expect that they're going to improve each year, like Beverly, Ariza, Anderson. Capella should get better. But, like, other than Capella, I think that everybody's kind of going in that way. But they're really good, and they're deep, so I think they'll be great. I think they'll be very strong next year.
I mean, this is as good as a start as I think D'Antoni had when he was in Phoenix, right? This is a really interesting team, I think, And again, I love their style, right? So other people hate it, but I love the style. It's basically it's like loving technical boxing. They're doing what they need to do with the right players, and it's really interesting to me.
Well, we should move on to the Dallas Mavericks, but before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about Harry's. Harry's is a very cool company. People who've listened to the show know that I love the concept of people, in this case it was Jeff and Andy, who identify a business that they want to get into and figure out a different way to do it to get customers a great product at a great price. And how Jeff and Andy did it was that they bought a factory with 100 years of blade making experience so they could make their own high quality razors and then sell them online and give them to you for about half the price of the leading brand. And another thing that I really like about Harry's, beyond their excellent product, which I've been using now for, I think it's about a month, and I've been I'm very impressed. I'm very reliable, brand conscious about a lot of different products, but razors have been one of them for a long time. I've used a higher priced brand and I've been incredibly impressed. I've made the switch and I've gotten great shaves, comfortable, close shaves, and I've challenged it. I talked about this the first time I did read for them, that I grew out my facial hair more than I usually do, and it was perfect. It was an absolutely wonderful shave. And another thing that I really do love about Harry's is that the way that they're doing a promo for us is in a lot of ways a bet on themselves. So you go to harrys.com/realgm and you can get their most popular trial set for free with a small fee for shipping. And so that means that if you go to that URL, harrys.com/realgm, you get a razor handle, 5-blade cartridge, and shaving gel for just that low shipping charge. And you can see if you like it as much as I do. They have an amazing reputation. I heard about it before, but as I said, I was a little bit brand loyal, and I'm incredibly happy that I did make that changeover. So again, you go to harrys.com/realgm. You can get their trial set for just the low price of shipping. So hopefully you check it out, and hopefully you keep checking out the podcast, Arturo and I talking about the Dallas Mavericks. So Dallas, the numbers were 39.5 or 42.5. We both thought that was just a little bit too high based on their talent. You and I both love Rick Carlisle. We said the under, they're going to go just under. Yeah, and Carlisle has done a masterful job this season. Absolutely. I think it's great. I think they might get in the playoffs. I mean, it's a little bit, it's tough because Denver's there, but man, this is the fact that they found Curry, the other Curry. There's so many parallels with the Timberwolves of they just needed another month of the season. Yeah, I mean, how do you feel about the roster now? It's a solid Rick Carlisle roster for right now, but they have the same issue as a couple of other teams where they're not going to get that much better. I mean, except for Nerlens and his fit, as long as he and Carlisle can be simpatico, I think that'll work. But they're going to have to be so smart about how they manage this roster moving forward, because they don't have guys on bad contracts except for Dwight Powell, but they don't have as much flexibility as some people think. Well, I think having Barnes and Curry and Matthews and Jogi Ferrell and Nerlens Noel is a lot better than what we thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season. Yeah, that's definitely true. They've improved a lot in a couple different ways. They have 5 guys going forward who I think are above average NBA starters at the key positions, and they're not on bad contracts. And they were in a really bad spot. So I think kudos to Dallas for turning it around in a very quick manner, in a way that is kind of unorthodox. But I think that they've done a good job. And Rick Carlisle's, again, done a great job. I think they're just going to miss the playoffs because too many people are ahead of them. But I think that this is a decent kind of roster going forward. And it's going to be really interesting because there's a bunch of free agents. And I think Dallas is a lot more attractive than I thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season. Does that make sense? Sort of, but they're going to need exactly the right type of guy. Depending on what kind of guy wants him. So I would say they need a forward, because they'll play Wes at the 2, Harrison at kind of the 3-4 hybrid. So they're going to need another guy there who, ideally, you want somebody who can play, 6-man minutes now and then can start when Dirk retires. And those players are exceedingly hard to get. They're going to have to identify that talent. Getting Nerlens, if they can have him at a reasonable price, is a huge coup. They don't have to find that guy now, which was going to be maybe even harder. But the other part, and I understand why they didn't have this, it's the challenge of tanking. I talked about this with Nate on Dunked On about a week ago. But the problem is they're stuck pretty hard on the treadmill right now with Dirk, because they can't get bad enough to get the draft pick, which is the easiest way to solve their problems. So they're too good to do that, and they're not good enough to be the best option for a lot of free agents.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I think they've done a good job at getting guys who were kind of undervalued and bringing them in.
Sure.
Right. And I think they've understood the cap pretty well. So again, kudos. I think that I agree with you. I mean, they might be an interesting Paul Millsap destination, although we've talked about him going somewhere else. But again, that's
I don't think he's going to go there, considering like he doesn't fit in with Dirk and some of the other stuff. Like he would go there if Dirk retired, maybe, but I don't think he'd go there if Dirk comes back.
Do we think he's retiring or coming back?
He's coming back. He already said it.
I think they're in a much better spot than I thought they were going to be at the end of the season, and I think they're going to be in that playoff conversation, like low playoff conversation next year. Again, they need to find some players, but they have found some guys, so that's actually good. And I think here's the thing: I think they're going to be better next year because they're going to have Noel for a full season. And I do really like their training staff. I think their training staff is actually, I'd put them up there. I'd say they're one of the top in the league right now. So I think that they're going to be able to keep Noel's healthy, and that's going to make a real difference. So I think that 1 to 5, this is going to be more talent. I think this is easily a 500 team next year with the way it's constructed. Now, not much better.
At full strength, yeah. Let's move on to Memphis. So Memphis, they're another pretty straightforward one here. It was at 44.5, 45.5. We said to play the under because that was just a little bit too rosy for them, and it was a little bit too rosy for them.
Yeah, right now it's close. It's 44.5. It's 45.5. They project to 44. They are on a skid, right? They don't look good. They just have the pieces they have, and it's it's an older team, and eventually, Father Time was going to come for them. Now they have some decent pieces. I like Conley, but some of the other pieces on this team are just old. I mean, I like Gasol, but he's on the backside of his career. And Randall's been good, but again, the pieces on this team are just not there. And honestly, I think the skid might be more. Do you expect them to turn around? Do you expect them to? Well, they're going to make the playoffs, but I don't expect them to get out of the first round.
Yeah, I think they're a pretty standard, late seed playoff team. Whether they're the 6 or the 7. They just kind of go around there and they put a scare in a team, probably like a 5 or 6 game series that could, so you set the bar at 6. If they perform under expectations, it's 5. If they're over, it's 7. But I wouldn't give them much of a chance of winning it. And also, they've stayed healthier than I expected this year. I mean, Chandler Parsons has been out, but the other guys have stayed pretty healthy.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. I mean, I don't know that Parsons will ever be the guy he was. I mean, they took the gamble on that. I just don't think. I don't see the next guy on this team. They've got Conley, but I don't see anything else.
Yeah, I think they're going to age in. They're going to age into the wilderness, and we've seen that before. I think that's what the Raptors are going to eventually do as well. Though they got some nice stuff with Norman Powell. There are these teams that are they're pretty good right now. They've had a nice run, and they just, because of the way the salary cap works, they'll pay those guys, and once those contracts go out, at that point they'll probably rebuild, but they'll just run this team until they don't have any more gas left.
Do you think they're going to move any of their assets in the offseason?
No. I think they're just going to keep it together.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I do think, again, they're going to get the Spurs or the Warriors in the first round. And, yeah, the Warriors are a terrible matchup for them, and the Spurs basically still remember losing to them, so the Spurs basically play them angry. And
the Rockets are a nightmare for them because the Rockets are, their offense just you can't play. You have to play all of their big men at center, and they don't have enough other guys. They're not.
I think the Thunder are gonna. The Thunder are gonna be a 6 seed.
So do I. I agree with that too.
I don't think Memphis is gonna catch them. So I think that or they're not gonna stay with them. So I think they're gonna get Spurs or Warriors, and they'll be glad to win one of the 5 games and move on. So let's talk about Portland. I think Portland's interesting.
They are interesting. So they won 44 games last year. Vegas liked them a little bit better than that. 44.5, 46.5. You said overfade, I said underfade, and I was right.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happened for this team is that their bigs kind of regressed in a really bad form. So, and I'm specifically thinking of
Aminu.
So basically, they had some players who regressed significantly this year. And I think that once so the roster that they had before the trade deadline wasn't great. I think that actually it's interesting because I love the trade that they make. Actually, I think that
fantastic.
I think the Nurkic is a great fit for this team, and he's playing really, really well, and they've actually been playing really, really well since they made that trade. And I'm interested Do you think I think it's going to be Denver, but it's going to be close, right? Because I think Portland's just going to miss the playoffs, but I do think they're in a much better spot than they were before the deadline. The elephant in the room is so. Do you need Lillard and McCollum?
I've been on board for a long time with keeping them together unless you get a ridiculous offer for CJ, and I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, they're imperfect, but it basically gave them a design imperative to get a defensive center, and while Nurkic is better than... I think Nurkic is straight up better than Plumlee, but he's on a way more favorable contract. He's not the perfect answer for them if they wanted to reach their ceiling, but he's a reasonable, and that's why I wanted them to get Nerlens. But that didn't happen. That would have actually been the most baller move if they could have pulled it off. Would have been if they used the draft pick that they shouldn't have gotten in the Nurkic trade to get Nerlens, and they got both of those guys and basically said, we're taking 2 bites at the apple. That would have been they had a spectacular trade deadline. That would have been perfect.
I think this front office, I've always been impressed with the front office for Portland recently. They've done a good job. I think they had some regression this year, but again, it was weird because people expected the last year to be off, and this year was the one that was off. But I think that Nurkic move was really a move because I think they have 3 guys who can get them to the playoffs consistently for a while. I think that the issue is what I said. It's like McCollum and Lillard. Do you maybe want to move for a slightly different asset, maybe a different wingman? But I think this is a team that's going to significantly be better this next year. They might make the playoffs this year, and it would be interesting, but I don't think they're going to get it because I do think Denver is better at this point.
I think let's move on to the Clippers, another team we won't have to talk about that much because we already talked about them a lot. Clippers, the line was set at 53.5 or 54.5, basically in line with what they were last year. And you said under and fade. I said over and fade. You got it right. I think for me, it's Chris Paul missed a week or so more than I expected, or whatever like that.
But everybody always gets hurt on the Clippers. This team always,
that's true. But usually it's late in the year or something like that.
Blake misses time and Chris Paul misses time and somebody always misses time.
Except for DeAndre because he's a cyborg.
Yeah, DeAndre never misses time. But and then they also have the issue with the roster isn't great past the top, and just rough. It's going to be interesting because it's going to be healthy coming into the playoffs, and Chris Paul was playing at an otherworldly level early in the season. Again, my problem is I kind of think that Utah is better than them, and if that's going to be the matchup, then I think this might be the swan song for this Laker team. Clippers. I know you're a little bit higher than I am. Do you think they can actually go deep this year?
No.
It's weird because I like their top 3, but I think that part of the problem is I think that Chris Paul and Blake might be checked out come playoffs.
Well, I think they'll be engaged in the playoffs. I think that'll be their real last gasp. Okay, we need to go pedal to the metal for this stretch, and we'll see what we do. I'm not worried. It's kind of like Cleveland in that way. I'm not necessarily worried about it, but the real problem for them going beyond that is even though their starting 5 was very good when they were healthy and together, it's not good enough to beat either of the 2 best teams in the league. And I don't think they're a particularly favorable matchup against the Rockets either, especially because the Rockets are so much better off their bench.
And I don't think they're a great matchup against the Jazz either.
Yeah, I don't think they're a great matchup against the Jazz either. So, barring them having the injury luck that has gone against them basically every single year.
I don't think they have a chance to make the finals, and I do think that this really might be. This might be it for this team. If they don't make it past the first round, I think this team gets blown out. I think Blake's gone. I think Chris Paul's gone, and I think that if that's the case, then boy, what do you do? We mentioned it before. I think that Doc might be done too here. Right.
If any of their best players leave, Doc's done. Well, I think they could go the other direction too. So basically, the issue that both Chris and Blake have is that no team can offer them as much money as the Clippers can. I believe Ballmer is going to offer both of them their full maximum. So that's a really hard thing to turn down. Basically, you're kind of asking them to sacrifice money on a good team. Nobody's going to argue that the Clippers are bad. You're asking them to sacrifice that, and there isn't a real title contender that I think is going to do it. The only exception to that, and I sincerely doubt that this is going to be on the table, especially considering he doesn't fit their MO. But I talked about this with Dan Wojcicki a long time ago on Real Jam Radio. But if the Celtics offered Chris Paul their max and basically said, if we get you, we'll trade Isaiah Thomas for assets, that would be a harder thing to turn down because the Celtics with Chris Paul would just be monstrous.
Aren't the Celtics going to offer that? I keep thinking they're going to offer it to Blake, no?
They might. I think that a Blake Horford frontcourt just basically guarantees problems. Like, I like both of those guys, but I don't like them together. But Chris Paul is just such a phenomenal talent, but I don't see that move happening. Like, I don't see Chris going there. And all the other teams, like Cleveland doesn't have the cap space for him. The Spurs don't really have it, especially if Pal opts in. Like, Chris Paul...
Spurs, I was actually thinking about this. The Spurs have some cap space.
No, they don't. Not really. I mean, because basically the logic...
It depends on where the cap's going to wind up.
I mean, it doesn't really that much because they have a lot of money tied up in Kawhi and LaMarcus, and they're not going to move those guys. And then the other part of it is like, oh yeah, maybe if they moved like basically everybody else on their team, they would have a lot of space. But that's not something they've ever done. So it's like...
What if LaMarcus is not?
He's not. And they're not gonna move him anyway. They're not gonna like if he's done enough, then they're not gonna have the assets to attach to trade him. And if he's not like that, they're not gonna move him. That's not what the Spurs do. They've never done that.
Yeah, he'd be interesting if Chris Paul wanted to win a title. The Spurs would be the perfect place for him.
Right. Except that Kawhi likes the ball in his hands a little bit much for that. But yeah, I mean, he's not going to get a better opportunity.
Yeah, but we've seen Kawhi play without the ball. I mean, this is not.
Of course.
Yeah, we've seen it. I mean, there's always the banana boat rumor, like.
But the banana boat doesn't make sense this year because LeBron's already under contract, and obviously he's not going anywhere.
They'd have to move Kyrie.
Yeah, and the Kyrie for Chris Paul thing would have been an absolute coup for the Clippers just because of the contract difference, but that's not going to happen now.
Yeah, and I didn't mention this before. I think the problem is like the thing with Kyrie is Kyrie's a really bad defender, right? And as much as he's good offensively, like there are guys who are comparable offensively who would be like somebody like Chris Paul would be better because of his defense, right? Like Chris Paul.
Well, I think Chris Paul would be miles better in the regular season. But in the playoffs, Kyrie's just amazing ability to be a one-on-one scorer and like take hard shots actually works really well with LeBron. I'm not saying like Chris Paul's a way better player, but for what Cleveland needs and what Cleveland has, I don't think the difference between them is that great in those circumstances. Other than that, Chris Paul's miles better. Like, I mean, he would make them such a better regular season team and in the first like 2-3 rounds of the playoffs. But then in that finals against the Warriors or the Spurs, I don't think he helps them as much as you think.
Would Chris or Blake cross the locker to the Lakers locker room?
I think Blake would be more open to it than Chris because if Chris Paul goes to the Lakers, they're still not winning anything. Like they'll make the playoffs, obviously, but they won't.
Yeah,
they're not going to be there. Like if Chris Paul, like let's say Chris Paul joins the Lakers and they keep their top 3 pick, that team, unless they like absolutely nailed a couple of trades, like that team is still probably losing in the first round. They're interesting. They would be like a darling of people like us.
If the Lakers they would need to get one of the free agents and they would need to trade for somebody, right? So I think that would be I think that's out there. I think that it's interesting because I do think that the Clippers' time might be done. I just don't know exactly how it plays. I don't know how the divorce in the end is going to play out. We could be wrong, but again, I can't see this team winning the first round. In my head, I can't see it. Now I could be wrong, but I just don't see it. It just doesn't. I don't feel it, and that's kind of it's sad because I thought this team had a shot a couple times. It just had some bad luck. I think let's move on to the Thunder.
Yeah, let's move on to the Thunder, but right before that, let's talk a little bit about SeatGeek. SeatGeek is my personal go-to for buying and selling tickets for concerts, sports, theater, really whatever you want to do. And there are a bunch of different reasons to use it, but I think a lot of it just goes into the idea of trying to save you time and save you money. They want to save you time by eliminating the amount of places that you go to look for tickets. As an aggregator, they pull tickets from all over the internet and put them in one place, just like Kayak does for flights. I use Kayak a lot. And so you don't have to worry about not only trying multiple places, but worry about missing out. You know, tickets are a variable commodity. Each one is a little bit different depending, unless it's a general admission show. So you can go through it that way. And also, not only do they combine it, but they use their deal score to save you even more time by figuring out the best combination of ticket quality and ticket price. And so I've been very impressed with their algorithm. I know venues very well because I used to be a ticket broker buying and selling tickets all over North America. And so I know these venues very well. I've been in a lot of them and I trust my own gut, but I just kept on finding out that they had such good data and that they were interpreting it well with their algorithms. And so I kept on, I was buying tickets for my parents once at an arena I knew really well, and I ended up going with the thing that had the number one deal score. So even when you have that direct knowledge, SeatGeek does a really great job. You download the free SeatGeek app, SeatGeek, enter the promo code REALGM, REALGM, just like RealGM, the site I write for, and RealGM Radio, and they will give you a $20 rebate on your first purchase. So you enter the promo code, you buy whatever you were going to buy in the first place, you get to use their great app, and then they will just send you $20. It's pretty fantastic, and it also tells them that you came from us, so I appreciate that as well. So again, it's SeatGeek, promo code RealGM using the settings tab, and you can find out if you love it as much as I do. And I've used it for years, and I will keep using it for years, whether they are a sponsor or not, but hopefully they are. So again, it's SeatGeek, RealGM. Now, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Here, because of the 55 games they won last year, because it was actually in that order, right. They were projected to be, this was one of the hardest lines for Vegas to do, 43.5 or 45.5. We both faded the over, and I think that's going to end up. It's going to end up hitting. It's going to be very close. Ended up being a well set line even after everything.
Yeah, I think this team. You were saying is like this team has actually gotten better. I think Russ has been outstanding. He's not going to win the MVP because he's not going to get the 45 games, right? But I think he's been great. And again, I do think that they've actually done a decent job of actually building something around him. So, like, I mean, Ty hasn't been great, but, like, I do think that, like, this is a better look. Now, it's all, like, Russ dependent, but, like, I'm really impressed that they haven't fallen further off. But I think a lot of that is Russ. I don't think they have a shot at the title. Right? Do you disagree with that?
No.
I do think
I don't think they have a good shot at making it out of the first round, but they're still a wonderful story for considering they lost one of the best players in the league for nothing.
Yeah, as I said, I mentioned it before. They had two of the top 50 players of all time on the roster just before their prime, and they just did not sign them, right? And this, I do think this is probably the biggest missed opportunity by a franchise in my lifetime, right? I mean, it's disappointing for the fans. I'm not necessarily disappointing. It's you get what you pay for, right? And I think
in some ways, it's actually more disappointing for basketball junkies than Oklahoma City fans because they're still blowing through the expectations when they got that team from Seattle. Obviously, it would have been great for them if they'd gotten all these titles, but for people like you and I, who wanted to see one of these just like amazing, undeniable teams, like the Thunder had the possibility with the talent they had on cost control, with the way that the league's salary structure worked. They had the possibility, if with the right ownership and the right management, of being, I would say, they had a top 10 to top 20 foundation for success of any team in the last 30 years.
Yeah, and they really kind of misunderstood who their most important player was, too. Like, I love Russ.
But they didn't even have to make that decision. They could have just kept Harden and waited. They didn't even have to. They forced themselves into a choice they never had to make. They wouldn't have even had to pay the luxury tax.
No, I agree with and they just completely misunderstood the cap. They could, and even if they did, they could have just written it off as a tax break. No, I agree. I mean,
They could have just amnestied Kendrick Perkins. Like, it wasn't. Basically, what happened was, I wrote about this for the Sporting News. I've been angry about this for years. I actually nearly wrote the piece 2 years ago. Was they predicted where they thought the salary cap was going to be.
They were wrong.
18 months ahead of when they could have known, and they were wrong. And so they made that move. They could have waited 18 months and said, okay, well, where's it going? And in that time, I wrote this piece for Sporting News about how this is what happened. And so, like, the league started knowing the contours of the television deal. They started seeing some of the other revenues increase. And, if they had waited, it would have been patently obvious that they could have kept Harden, that they would have already paid him his max. But they could have had him at that, kept everybody together, and they were all on value contracts. So if you decide at that point that it's not going to work, then you just trade him then.
And what makes it even worse is, you're familiar with the roster depreciation allowance, right?
Of course.
So basically, they could have just written it off. There's an exception that lets them, if they go over and they're wrong, they can basically just write it off for a couple of years and make a trade. And then all you have to do, the thing resets after 15 years, or if you basically give it over to your wife or something. So then talk about the owner.
They
So in essence,
also were still making a profit. Even if they paid the luxury tax, they still would have made a profit.
The amount of money they threw away by not keeping those guys in like franchise, like the franchise value appreciation. Like if they basically put together a run like the Bulls or like been in like 3 or 4 finals,
or even just like the Warriors have since then.
Yeah,
if that's all they did.
Well, yeah,
one title, 2 NBA finals, and having a good chance of making another one. If that was all they did, they'd be making money hand over fist.
Yeah, because they would make it just back on the franchise price, right? So the raise in franchise price would basically
and the extra revenue from all the playoff games. Like
right.
You're getting all that. You're not paying your players more. You're getting a ton of extra revenue. You can raise your ticket prices more. You can do even if Oklahoma City is not the biggest market. If you are that good, you can make it happen.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that overall we agree that it was a bad move. I think. So do you think this roster for Oklahoma City has possibilities going forward? I think this roster is really flawed. I mean, like it's
nope, I think they're pretty much what they are. They have players that can improve. They're not as kind of dead in as like let's say the Pistons are. They're not going to get that much better. So like I think their ceiling, depending on how everything else goes, like they can be in that 4-5 mix for a year or two or whatever, but I don't think they can really reach beyond that because they don't have any cap flexibility. They not only, which is not a bad thing, like you're not going to get free agents that much to Oklahoma City, and they gave reasonable deals to Adams and Oladipo, but this is their team. Yeah,
I do think that, I mean, they have 3 good guys at the top, right? Russ and Adams and Oladipo, but I agree with you, this is who they are, right? So there's a gap on how much they can do, and they might be happy with it, but it's kind of sad for them because it could have been like a great dynasty. And yeah. Is it better for the league though?
No, because they could have been that like galvanizing, inspiring young team. Granted, I don't think it goes in 2 different ways, but I think that. Well, I think we might have to answer that based on what happens with the Warriors, because like if this Warriors team kind of ends up similar to what that Thunder team was in terms of like where the Thunder team would be now, not where they were then it's kind of a wash. Then yeah, you lost those guys together, but Harden's in a great situation, Durant's in a great situation, Westbrook is doing his thing, and in the interim we got that wonderful Cavs story, the Warriors story, like a lot of it happened. So I think the league is maybe worse off, but not much.
I think what's interesting is like none of these guys wound up in the West. Sorry, in the East. So I think basically we split the difference because it just made the West playoffs have been crazy great, and I don't know that it would have been greater with them staying together. And like
it also probably I think the finals would have been worse because I think they would have been at this point, if they had been properly managed, they would have been a better team, not in the regular season but in the playoffs than the Warriors were last year.
We have the Spurs and the Warriors basically winning 60 plus, almost 70 games, and I think what's interesting is like basically so even if it wouldn't have made it because like nobody went east, so none of these guys. It's interesting none of these guys go east, right? We never get these star players.
Because the teams in the East that have money have terrible owners, and the teams in the West that have money have better owners.
Yeah, they have poor taste. It's like the Knicks always. I made this point before. The Knicks always get their guy, but it's always the wrong guy.
If you put a top 10 owner managing the Knicks at any point in the last decade, especially during this current CBA, if they had a competent owner, they're a top 5 franchise for the next 10 years. Like it's just a fact.
What's interesting about that is like I was talking to somebody. It's like what would it take for Dolan to sell? Like Dolan's making money hand over fist, right? I think it would take something ridiculous like $10 billion because you'd have to get him out and you'd have to like buy him out the MSG network. So it's like there's no chance. The Knicks, there's no chance. And yeah, I mean it's just really strange that like other than
basically the way that I would phrase it with Dolan is nobody would be willing to pay the price it would take.
It might be worth it, but like no, it's like it's nobody. Nobody has that scratch because he's really like he doesn't care. He's like he would make more money obviously if they won, but he's still making a ton of money where it is. So I think let's move on to the main event. We're getting to the top 2 teams in the league now.
But in terms of over-unders, these teams aren't super interesting. So the Spurs, it was 60. They won 67 last year. With everything that happened, we expected a regression. Tim Duncan retiring. was down to 56.5, 57.5. We both said the over. You wanted to play it. I said to fade it. That was definitely a better play by you because they're still gonna go past it no matter what.
Yeah, I actually, and I was saying this on Twitter, I've watched a significant amount of Dedmon with Kawhi, and actually I like having Dedmon on the floor more. He looks really good.
Dedmon at the 5, Kawhi at the 4 is I think they're...
Right. It's one of those guys who watch him, and he does all these things when, like, away from the ball. Like, he's running great picks, he's popping, he's getting stuff, he has touch around the basket. It's like, I don't know how they managed to get... Like, why is this guy... Maybe an indication that Orlando didn't know what they were doing. But
well, yeah, of course.
This guy should have been playing before now. So again, I think the thing with the Spurs is the Spurs are really deep and they have a lot of quality size. And I do think now.
Can I make a small point very quickly?
Sure.
How smart was Dwayne Dedmon taking a 1-year contract with the Spurs? Because he could have probably gotten like $3, $4, $5 million a year for like 3-4 years with somebody because, kind of the Kylo Quinn type contract. He's going to make so much more money by taking a little over $2 million to play with the Spurs this year.
What do you think? $345 for him?
Yeah, something in that range. Maybe $340. But somebody's gonna give him cash, and he deserves it. He's played very well for them.
He'd be great on the Celtics. He'd be great on another team that could actually.
God,
use
can
him.
you imagine if Minnesota hadn't given Jang that money? Like he's not the perfect fit next to Towns, but he would be great as their third big.
But is Deng bad? Deng's good. I like Deng.
He's all right.
He's all right. Here's the thing. I do think that what's been interesting about him, again, what I like about Dedmon is a guy who has really good productive numbers, but when you actually watch him on tape, he does all these little things, right? So it's like he plays good defense, he runs picks, he's really good at moving off the ball and running the PNR. So it's as I said, he's a guy who can definitely be on the floor in a conference final, so somebody's going to pay him.
There's also a piece of history here. I'm not completely sure of this, but I think I'm right. My memory is a little bit fuzzy on it. That I believe the Warriors were approaching Dedmon about taking the room mid-level exception. He was amenable to it. But then when Zaza said yes, they're like, oh crap, we can't do that. What about the minimum? And then I think he had the Spurs offer on the table. And it's like...
I think the Warriors basically signed him out of college, no?
I think he started there. He bounced around in Santa Cruz and Golden State. And so he was interested in it. But once they had that money difference and he knew the Spurs was a great opportunity, and I completely understand why Bob Myers went with Zaza over Dedmon, considering the risk involved and everything else. If they could choose right now, knowing what we know, I think they would take Dedmon in a heartbeat.
Yeah, again, I think the issue has been how good he actually looks around the basket. That to me is But again, I think the point being, with the Spurs is so I'd written them off as a title contender until about a month ago, right? And then I started watching them again because I was really interested, and I really like they've done an excellent job of they're of aping what the Thunder did in the sense that they have all these skilled big men, right? And I think in a series with the Warriors, they're going to give them fits because there's just too much size going on that team, going at the basket with good touch, and they're going to rebound people to death, and they're going to just get all these easy buckets, right? So that really makes them a really interesting. I think they're going to get the 1 seed now, and I think that that was a really stupid decision for the Warriors not to play this game because I think the Warriors just basically walked themselves into 3 really tough series, back to back to back. And a conference final on the road.
I was supposed to actually did a podcast on that for Locked On Warriors yesterday, talking about how I would have tactically done it the other way. But I want to push back a little bit. We talked about the Rockets earlier. I'm high enough on the Jazz that I don't think that series. It's definitely going to be a hard second round series, but I thought it was going to be hard either way. And the Spurs, they can rebound the Warriors to death, but the Warriors can shoot them off the floor because they can go 5 out. Basically the whole game if they want to. They're really close to it if Durant's back in full strength. And the Spurs, the only counter to that is Kawhi at the 4, and they basically have barely done that this year. So it's going to be a brutal series. It's going to be a tough series. It's the one I want to see more than any other, including any potential NBA Finals.
Pop is basically going to do exactly what Donovan did against the Thunder last year.
Yeah, but the Thunder don't do that very well against the Warriors. Like, that's the interesting thing. Like, if Pop replicates the Thunder, that would be better against the Spurs than against the Warriors.
I'm saying from last year, like, just basically throw out all the size out there, and I think that's going to be the. So in essence, it's going to be there.
But that doesn't work. That doesn't work against the Warriors.
The rebounding? I'm talking about crashing the boards.
That is a smaller thing than like the first shot defense and being able to actually defend the Warriors, because the Spurs, like, let's say, like, if it becomes a shootout, like if they play Pau Gasol in that series heavy minutes, the Warriors will score probably 115, 118 points per 100 possessions during those minutes, and the Spurs cannot score that many points. Like, they are incapable of it.
What they're gonna try to, it's gonna come down to what they're gonna try to do is, I call it the Laker way, which is they're going to just basically going to try to keep the field goal attempts for the Warriors down. That's the way that Thunder almost beat them. It's the way that the Cavs actually beat them in the finals, which is just keep the ball out of their hands. Yeah, they're gonna make their shots, just don't let them get second chances. And I think that the key here is Durant is, I mean, obviously he was the best player on the Warriors this year. But it's key because if you take him out of the equation, then like the rebounding situation gets even worse, and like the Warriors just haven't looked in sync without him, right? And it's a really kind of
but making the argument of like, yeah, the Warriors would lose to the Spurs without Kevin Durant is an obvious argument. Like, yeah, I mean, if Durant is any less than 90%, the Warriors are not going to win that series
because
there's not anything more that needs to be said about it.
But I think right now the Western Conference Finals is where the title is going to be settled.
Sure.
Right, which is, and I think that based on what we just saw, I think the Spurs right now should be favored to win the title. Right now. As of right now, with the fact that they look like they're going to win the 1 seed, and they're a lot healthier than the Warriors, I think that definitely you have to think out. It's a really interesting kind of dynamic, and it's interesting because the betting markets don't reflect this. To me, right now, the Spurs should be the favorite to win the title.
I don't have them as the favorite, but I think I respect your rationale. I disagree with it just because I think full strength versus full strength. I think the Warriors are favorites in that series, and really it goes to that.
But you have to adjust it to, I mean, again, I'm adjusting to the fact that I think the Spurs, based on the way that both teams are playing right now, I think the Spurs are going to get the 1 seed, and I think right now the Spurs are healthy.
See,
right?
I don't think home court matters in that series. I don't think it matters that much.
But again, I also don't think that I would put the chances of the Warriors being 100% in the Western Conference Final at something like 30%. The standard recovery for that injury is 6 weeks, and there were 6 weeks left in the regular season when he got hurt. I mean, you're saying that chance is 30%. You're saying that his injury is substantially worse than the standard projections because it's a month from the end of the regular season to the Western Conference Finals. We've seen him have similar injuries before, and it takes him a while.
Not knee stuff. Knee and foot injuries are very different.
I know. I mean, like, I'm just saying, like, right now, like, I know why I feel like, again, I'm just saying, like, basically, the Warriors are still showing up as the clear favorites, and they really shouldn't be favored over the field at this point. I think that basically, if San Antonio is playing Golden State in the Western Conference Finals, I think it's going to be an even-up series, and I think that that's different than what the markets are saying. Right?
I agree with you that the markets are probably wrong. I think that they're probably overstating it, but again, I don't think we're going to make any headway on it. But we should move on to the Warriors. Yeah. The Warriors, there was at 66.5 or 68.5. We both said play the over. Looks like they're going to go under because Kevin Durant's missing the last 6 weeks of the year, and I don't think this season, if he comes back in his full strength, I don't think it's been a disappointment anyway. It's just that they had a little bit of an adjustment. They had a few flat games, and otherwise they've been quite good.
Do you think that the Warriors miss Luke Walton?
I think they miss Alvin Gentry more than they miss Luke Walton.
Interesting.
Because Luke Walton was more about, like, I think that was more of an attitude thing, but I think the attitude was always going to shift this year based on what happened in the finals. And Gentry would be a little bit more creative offensively, and one of the Warriors' big problems this year has been that they've had a lack of creativity offensively. They've run their system, they've done their thing, and they've been fine, but in those circumstances, like, this is something I haven't said publicly before, but if theoretically the Pelicans fired Gentry now, if I were the Warriors, I'd try to bring him back on the bench.
Because, this does not look like the same team than last year. And what I mean by that is, like, just offensively, I agree with you. They're not... They were taking people out, and I think there's two things. Like, offensively, they were better, and I think that in terms of sets and what they were running. and also the attitudes. I think both these pieces are missing. Right? They were literally going out there and just trying to destroy people every game last year, and that's not the same feel. So I think they do kind of miss that, and it will happen when you lose your two top assistants. Right? It does shift your team a little bit, and it's just been a little more adverse.
Well, but I think more than that, it was that they had that history-making regular season. They won 73 games. They lost in the finals, and they got nothing to show for it. And I think what they learned from that was, why were we gunning for every single game in the regular season? It didn't get us anything. And I think that I don't attribute that shift to assistant coaches. I don't attribute it mostly to Kevin Durant coming. But the one thing that we haven't seen from this Warriors team very much, despite them being strong in defensive rating overall, is I feel that their defensive ceiling is really high now with the Draymond at center lineups, because, well, obviously they did really well. They were gangbusters with those units previously. Durant in the playoffs with that intensity is going to be a significant upgrade over Harrison Barnes if he can be 100%.
Right, and I think that's where Durant is key, and I think because, as I said, I think the way to beat this team is on the boards, and the way to beat this team is by being physical on them, because whether people want to admit it or not, the game gets called differently in the playoffs, right? And that style, which is a lot rougher, does actually kind of give this team problems. You said they don't get whistles in the playoffs, and I think that the teams that they're going to see are going to think the teams that are going to basically want to mix it up and rough it up and make it tougher. So again, I think having Durant is key. Obviously because he's the best player on the team, or has been this year, and I agree with you that getting Gentry back would be good, right? I do think that this is obviously a more interesting situation than last year, because I don't think that they're a sure thing like last time. We know how that turned out, but again, 2016 was just strange. I mean, hell, the Cubs won the World Series, so weird. But I think it's a lot more open, and I think they're going to have to earn their way to the finals here. I think it's a lot tougher, at least on paper, which, considering how it went last year, it's interesting. I think it pictures a lot more interesting than the finals and the playoffs did before the start of the playoffs last year, even though they ended up being really interesting last year.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I will clarify that for me, the way that you beat the Warriors is by switching, being able to switch and not losing that much. And that's also part of the reason why I don't love the Spurs in that. Depending on how they use Kawhi, that's why Kawhi at the 4 is so key. Because if you put Powell or even Dedmon on Curry, that's just problems.
I mean, this is why I think I mentioned it before. This is why the Celtics are built to play the Warriors, because they have all these guys on the wing that can actually switch and are good defenders, right? But again, they have other issues. If
they can get a Gordon Hayward or Jimmy Butler next year, they can really make some noise against the best of the best. But they haven't done it yet.
They need a guy who can rebound consistently.
I mean, it's not gonna if they could theoretically get Millsap and play him at center in crunch time. The problem with that, of course, is that they paid his former teammate, and he's their center. But Millsap at the 5 with their lineup would be amazing.
So we liked KD at 11-1 to win the MVP, and that looked right for a while. But hey, he got hurt. Anything else we're looking forward to
in terms of awards and odds and stuff?
Yeah, no, I mean in terms of the playoffs. Yeah, overall.
I think in the East we're gonna have interesting stuff the whole way through, unless there are upsets. In the West, I think that other than the Jazz Clippers series, which would be awesome, we're going to have kind of a shaky first round and then an amazing second and third round.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting that I think it could be more interesting than you think. It depends on who winds up. I mean, Memphis is kind of the
Memphis and the Thunder are just they're just lower tier teams. If I didn't believe in the 2 and 3 in the Western Conference, yeah, that would be something different. But we're looking at it. It'd be fun. I think it'd be a really fun 5-game series.
Yeah, I think the second round in the West is going to be a lot more interesting.
Oh man, second round in the West is going to be fabulous.
I think the first round in the East is going to be crazy. Because I think there's not a lot of difference between the top teams in the East and the bottom teams in the East. And I think that the bottom teams, and we talked about this before, which is the bottom teams in the East are very interesting matchups to the top teams in the East. So I think the first round has real possibility. Once you get past that, it gets less interesting. But I think the first round is the East is where it's going to be, which is a little different than it's been a couple other years.
Well, At this point, considering our original recording is about 3 hours, I think that I've taken up enough of your time, but as always, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure, yeah.
Thanks again to Arturo Galletti for taking the time to come on. I do always love talking with him, and doing the over-unders is one of my highlights every single year. You can follow him on Twitter at American Numbers. That's AmericanNumbers. I might try to put out another episode this week. I'm legitimately unsure on if I'm going to have the time, working on a few projects and everything else, and of course a lot of basketball to watch. So if I can, I will. If not, there will of course be a new one next week, as there always is. And that will probably involve talking about one of the things that I'm working on. So that'll be fun. And yeah, there's a lot going on in the league, but we are in this kind of weird holding pattern. I don't want to do much team-specific stuff because we're still figuring out what a lot of these teams are. And so I want to wait a little bit on that, but I'll figure out exactly where to go on that in the very near future. If you want to give feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, Danny Leroux, NBA at gmail.com, at Danny Leroux on Twitter. If you take the time to write it, especially if it's an email, I will take the time to read it. I do not promise to respond, but I take the time. But reading it is absolutely the least I can do, considering I am asking for that feedback and really do appreciate it. And also, if you want to support the show, there are a lot of different things that you can do. For Real Jam Radio in particular, it is wonderful if you subscribe and download every episode. This one regrettably took longer to put out than I really wanted it to, considering we recorded a week ago, but it can be sporadic. So if you subscribe, then it'll pop into your podcast player whenever it comes in. If you download every episode, that's a great way of supporting it, because this business is still built on downloads. So if there are any shows that you like, whether you're listening to the episode or not, you should listen. But if you don't, even download the episode, because that shows your support, and we use that for advertisers. And that ties in with the other big way that you can support this show and any others, is by checking out our advertisers. So for this episode, that is mybookie.ag, where you can make wagers, particularly those of you who are interested in college basketball. mybookie.ag, and if you use the promo code REALGM, you get a 50% deposit bonus. So if you put in $100, they add $50 to it, and you can play and win money with that. So it's pretty awesome. Harry's, high-quality razors at a reasonable price. Harrys.com, HARRYS.com/RealGM, and you can get their popular trial set for free. So that's a handle, a razor, and shaving gel for just the low price of shipping. It's free other than that. It's awesome. I've been using it for the last little while now. Very impressed with their product. And then our old friends at SeatGeek. So you can buy and sell tickets through SeatGeek. I do both, and I do them with some frequency. And if you use the free SeatGeek app, SeatGeek, and the promo code REALGM, REALGM, just like the other ones, then you get a $20 rebate on your first purchase. So you input it, you get $20 whenever you make your first buy. And for all of those, not only are you getting a great product, or in the case of MyBookie, getting the opportunity to make yourself a great product with the money you make, you are also telling them that you came from us. And that is very important, because that allows them and other future advertisers to want to use us and to help keep the lights on. So I really do appreciate all of you taking the time to do that. As I said, not exactly sure where I want to go for next week and moving forward, but plenty of material, plenty of real estate to use as we get closer to the playoffs. And for those of you who listen to Real Jam Radio in the playoffs before, there's a real high point for me. And of course, if you want to check out Dunked On, Nate Duncan and I do, I'm really proud of our work there too. We do a lot, and this week's been a little bit quieter, but we'll keep going full bore next week. And then I do Locked On Warriors, which is my daily Warriors podcast, and then you can check out my writing, The Athletic. I should have some new stuff at the Sporting News. I've submitted a few pieces. I think they're going through the editorial process, and then we'll have some cool Real GM material in the near future. Going to start working on the CBA encyclopedia, incorporating the new CBA into it probably in the next few weeks, depending on when my schedule opens up. So thank you so much for listening. Take care, and make it a great day.